the latest of the National Community Safety Network webinars. This one today is about engaging communities and also leading to neighbourhood agreements. My name is Jeff Kirkman. I'm a board member of NCSN, and my previous life I was responsible for community engagement across the Greater Manchester Police Authority. During that time, I came across my colleague here, Katie Finney. Katie was one of the stalwarts of the youth community engagement scheme that we set up in Greater Manchester back in around the early 90s. Katie sort of really got involved in the development of youth strategies and community engagement across the borough, so much so that she was one of the leading lights in the development of Bury's corporate youth strategy. For her efforts in that particular area, she was awarded in 1997, I think I'm right, Katie?
Yeah, Ageing with Jeff.
Ageing, yes. Awarded Young Citizen of the Year by Greater Manchester Police in recognition of all the work that she'd done. Obviously, over the years, Katie's come on and is now running a successful community interest company with one of her colleagues, and it specialises in engaging communities. I think just to set a scene, the importance of engaging communities, local communities, businesses, voluntary sectors is really important for any organisation wishing to develop a cohesive strategy. Quite a lot of people engage communities, get all the consultation and have no implementation strategy. Katie's presentation will cover that sort of area as well. Communities are really fed up of being done to. You know, the sticking plaster goes on. We will bring, you know, we've got problems with obesity in this particular area. We will bring in a team and we'll put a sticking plaster on it. Nobody ever asks the communities what they want, how they want services to be delivered to them. When I say nobody, it does happen, but quite often nothing's done. We'll cover at the end how people have come together to develop community businesses or social enterprises to actually deliver some of the services that communities want. So without further ado, can I pass over to Katie and she'll take you through her presentation.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to attempt now to share with you some slides. So I will do that and then I can talk you through them. So I'm going to take the webcam off just for a second. So I'm hoping that those slides are now visible for you and that you can hear me. I'm going to assume that's the case and continue on. So as Jeff mentioned, I'm the co-founder of an organisation called Amity, and we do work with engaging neighbourhoods, and the write-up of the webinar explained that we do that using a particular process. Specifically, this webinar is about the importance of putting local people at the heart of engagement and how human-centred design supports this to happen. So what do I hope you take from this seminar? So when I was trying to put this together and trying to articulate the way that we work, this was what was really going through my mind. And there's two things that I hope you take. Jeff alluded to one of them, and that is that you see engagement as something with the community instead of for the community. It may well be that you already think that way, but I hope that I'll introduce you to human-centred design as an approach to really reinforcing that thinking. So I wanted to start with a little bit of history, which Jeff also referred to briefly. And that's my history with engagement. So I wanted to, all for a second, imagine an idealised place where in a community where concerns about safety are shared, tackled and overcome in an inclusive and creative way, with an increase in of empowerment and pride in that community. That sounds like a pretty great community, and I would imagine that you're striving for that kind of scenario in the work that you do day to day, and it's certainly something that we try to pursue at Amity. And this idea is not so far, actually, in all honesty, from my experience of being engaged. And so when I think about the process that we adopt at Amity, I reflect on my experience of being engaged, and that involved several elements. And initially, as somebody being engaged, I'm going to talk you through my experience of being engaged and how it informs the decisions we've made about the approach we take to engaging and working with communities. And as a young person, I was pretty cynical, and I didn't really trust those policemen and authorities that came into our school and asked us to share our issues and challenges with them. But actually, with a lot of patience and perseverance on the part of those organisations, Jeff specifically, that process of being listened to did build my trust and break down that cynicism. It did arrive at a point, however, where it did just start to feel a little bit like a talking shop, where what we were discussing and what we were sharing was being listened to, but wasn't really going much further. And it was very fortunate at that time that engagement was really actually quite committed to by various stakeholders and various authorities. And as it became clearer and clearer that community safety issues that we discussed with the police actually crossed over to many other sectors, to many other areas that needed to include other agencies and other departments across the local authority. So as a result, several young people who'd been involved in the youth forums were invited to take part in a newly formed Youth Issues Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of Bury Council. Now you can just imagine, as a young person, entering that daunting situation, and I had a lot of fears related to that around these large systems, institution, and powerful people that suddenly were asking me to come along to these meetings that felt a little alienating. But again, it was a very open and inclusive environment that was created, which led to this successful experience. And so I overcame those fears, and it took some time. It took a good 6, 12, 24 months, but there were this core group of young people who were really committed to overcoming the challenges they felt in this engagement and sharing them with the people who were giving us that opportunity. And then what really made this whole package and my experience of engagement successful, and why I work in the way that I do, bringing these elements together, is that there was really commitment to investing resources, because as young people, the cynicism creeps in really easily, and I don't think that's just true of young people. I can think it can be true of all sorts of people who maybe just feel that a process ends up being an exercise in creating lots of things to think about. The difference really for me about this process was the commitment of investing resources in the solutions that were devised by those young people on the committee. So we went and talked to our friends back at school and back out on the streets when we were hanging out, asking what people wanted. And we knew that there was a pot of money available that Bury Council had committed to using to find solutions to challenges around young people and antisocial behaviour. And what that really meant was I felt empowered, trusted and relevant, and that I was being listened to, that I was being included. And as a result, a drop-in centre in our local park was designed, built and managed by young people. Now, that really is a story of successful engagement for me, and I hope it gives you a taste of the reasons why I felt that was successful. And I alluded to some of the barriers that could have got in the way of that process being effective. And at the outset, with the youth forums, it could have easily collapsed as a successful process due to consultation fatigue and cynicism on the part of myself or of the young people. And then as it progressed to be a more inclusive process of other agencies and multidisciplinary organisations, but also of me and my friends entering into these unknown and scary institutions and structures, it could also have been started to feel far too scary, but there were things in place to support that. The other barrier that could have arisen was if there had been a lack of tangible and relevant solutions. So if it really, again, felt like it was starting to go nowhere, I think I would have disengaged and given up on the whole process. So the world I asked you to imagine is no doubt an idealised one. And these barriers are challenges that we face and that we have to overcome in pursuit of that ideal. And I'm sure you have lots of other barriers that you work with day to day. But these are the three that really we consider at the heart of creating a positive solution and a positive engagement experience, is knowing how to tackle and overcome these barriers. But before I go any further into looking at how we might do that, I wanted to just make sure when we talk about engagement that we're all talking from the same place, and that there's all sorts of different understandings of engagement, and I'm sure you've got your own. But I wanted to share with you my definition of engagement that we work with. And that's the idea that engagement is a two-way dialogue which is appealing and constructive for all sides. So the reason we work with this is that the engagement is seeking to be appealing and constructive for all sides, and that it's two-way. When we talk about two-way and all sides, what we're actually talking about there is people. So the dialogue is between people, and it's relevant for everybody. So considering the barriers that we've mentioned and building on the positive experience that I've described, how do we create the environment for that effective engagement? So these are the barriers that we've already talked through. And one of the ways in ensuring that dialogue is appealing is to know and understand what is important for the people concerned. So going into the community is very important. Talking to the people who are experiencing challenges is very important. And that, in my first experience of engagement that I've described to you, was in the shape of youth forums, but it could be in the shape of other community meetings or public meetings that I'm sure many of you already have in place. But to really do that effectively, to really listen and understand and make people feel that they're not getting fatigued by the process and break down their cynicism, that has to have at its heart empathy. So fear of unknown institutions and structures is also a barrier, and this is where the need for dialogue to be constructive, and that's actually about working together to make things happen. You need to have a process that supports effective collaboration, people coming together to work well together. And the lack of tangible and relevant solutions can also be a barrier or a breaking point in the process. And that means we have to be in a position of empowerment, both of ourselves, but essentially of the community, and see our role in the engagement process as being one of empowerment. So if Empathy, collaboration and empowerment help overcome the barriers we've talked about and create the best environment for engagement. How do we create these? So it's most likely that you are seeking to engage the community to solve community safety challenges. And if you're the ones engaging the community, it doesn't necessarily mean they want to be engaged. So we see the engagement process is very much a facilitative experience. When we enter into a community, we're facilitating them through a process. We're not imposing engagement upon them. And to make that experience empathetic and to include empathy, you have to create trust and openness. Trust and openness creates a safe space for the community to enter into the two-way dialogue that we're seeking to establish. So when there's trust and openness, people start to share their true feelings and their true frustrations, their needs and their motivations. And when that honesty is in place, you have an opportunity to empathise. So that is the real ability to understand people's experiences, communities' experiences, and how they feel about their community safety. And from that point, you can start to develop meaningful understanding of the challenges that need to be solved. So collaboration, as I've already said, is really about people working effectively together. And imbuing the process with inclusion and effective teamwork is really vital. And the way to really do that, the correct effective teamwork, is establishing a very strong group culture, to agree how we're going to work together, to have a process that supports everybody to work in the way in which it has been agreed. And empowerment, so if you're really going to empower people to make a difference in their community, it requires commitment and resources. It's not necessarily the case that the commitment and resources are enormous, but if at the very start of any given process, there is openness about what can be expected in terms of resources and in terms of commitment of time, of energy, of skills, of venues and of money. If that's open, the communities are very, very good at working within constraints and solving their own problems within constraints. But that commitment and clarity of what resources are available are very important, and a real openness around that throughout the process. So if these are the ways to create the environment for effective engagement, how does human-centered design support engagement? So human-centered design is a problem-solving approach, which, as I hope you may expect, puts the need for empathy, collaboration and empowerment in the middle of the process. And of course, what we're talking there about empathy, collaboration and empowerment of people for people. So this diagram, there's two diamonds. This is called the double diamond. And this is the UK Design Council's representation of the design process. And design is considered to be an effective process to use around particularly difficult social challenges. And human-centered design uses this process with people at the heart of it. The reason the design shaped, I will explain, is because there are 4 stages, and each of these stages is either convergent or divergent. So the discover phase is a divergent experience where you're discovering an awful lot of information. And the focus stage is a convergent stage where you're taking all of that information, filtering it down to really focus the challenge, focus the project and focus the solutions. Ideate is an opportunity for everybody to have really big ideas, and again is a very convergent stage. Divergent stage, where no ideas are too large. And the implementation and the development of specific strategies for the implementation is a divergent stage. Again, that has to really come together to create feasible solutions, and so things start getting dropped if they're not feasible or viable or desirable, and so that narrows the focus of the process to be convergent. So that's a very, very high level overview representing the process and how the design process is conceived. That's quite theoretical. And there's another bit of theory around the design process that I want to explain to you, because it may appear from the double diamond that this is a linear process. And I'm sure in any of your experiences of projects or engagement with communities, the experience is actually quite a messy one and an iterative one. And that's another reason why the design process is a very useful approach to particularly complex challenges. It's because it uses tools and mindsets that allow constructive and productive working in very messy, uncertain, iterative situations. So the process can feel very much like the top diagram there. It can, for the majority of the time, as you're working through the process, it feels unclear, it feels tangled. And so the role of those engaging is very much to support communities and colleagues and all stakeholders to cope with that uncertainty and to navigate the way through it, and to also understand the iterative nature of the process so that it isn't linear. So if suddenly something changes at some point down the line, there is capacity within the project to go back and tweak things. And that's a very important feature of ending up with a strong strategy and a strong end solution. And that's also the reason for Amity's logo, is because the process is this tangled mess that you see at the front, and what we hope to create is amity, friendship and mutual understanding out of a process that can sometimes feel very difficult. So I want to dive a little bit further into this process. Now, don't worry too much about the diamonds or about the iterative nature. What I want to do now is give you a little bit more detail about what we mean by each of these stages. So in the discover or discovery stage, we get inside the community and understand what challenges they want to overcome, what are their real problems. And a core team and its culture are created, and that core team is made up of various relevant stakeholders, the community of course included. And what happens in the discover, as the name of that stage may tell you, is lots of research. So the core team, so members of the community, take part in this research. They research the challenge. We talk to the community, talk to colleagues, talk to peers, understand needs and motivations in the community. And as mentioned, it's a divergent stage where as much information as possible is gathered. And then once we feel we've gathered as much as possible, either new or existing data, we move into narrow the focus a little bit. And through the analysis of what we discovered, the problem sometimes and often, actually, not even sometimes, often, is redefined. So what we thought was the problem, what we thought was the challenge, emerges to be a slightly different one or a completely different one. So the core team comes together to share all of the findings and to select really what challenge are we solving. So insights gathered in the discover phase help to narrow the focus on a really specific problem to be solved. That's very important so that everybody has shared value of the problem that is being solved and knows that that's the priority for this project. And once we know really what the challenge is and what people's needs are around that challenge, we're able to come up with ideas and solutions. So the core team co-create solutions to the challenge. Ideas are chosen and prototyped, so they're taken into the community and really rough and quickly, as is the case in design, tested to see if actually they're of interest or not, and they're refined based on feedback from the community. Also based on on constraints around feasibility, viability and desirability. So across the multidisciplinary nature of the core team is important here, and cross-sector expertise may be brought in to support the development of really feasible solutions. So it's really this is really about having lots and lots of ideas and testing them against their feasibility. And then we move into bringing the ideas to life. So the implementation, so that the solutions that we think really are going to work have the potential to turn into something really great, are finalised, often in the form of strategies and more formal agreements, neighbourhood agreements in some cases, and formal strategies in others. And it is also what we strive to do with Amity, and we work with Jeff to do this, is to generate community-run enterprises which deliver components of or all of the solution and are sustainable. And then we're really empowering the community. So to give you a little bit more detail about how we do this, I'm going to talk you through a couple of tools. Now there's lots of tools out there, and our approach is taken from an organisation called IDEO, who is a US organisation, and they're a product and service development organisation. But they also work with social challenges. And the human-centred design process, and the reason that we use some of these tools, supports engagement and is sustainable solutions because it creates the legacy of sustainability, and it creates capacity in the community groups and empowers them to transform their own communities. And we do that by building on existing toolkits, but also bringing into our process tools around leadership and culture to develop those really strong cultures that I talked about earlier that are required, and also enterprise coaching, which supports empowerment and the development of new skills for communities. So I'm just going to talk you through, you'll see at the top right hand corner of the slides there's the double diamond. So you'll see that when I'm talking about these particular tools, if we call them that, you'll see which stage of the process they're usually used in. So one of the most important things at the outset is to embed dedicated support within neighbourhoods, so you really do integrate into the community, to engage creatively and consistently, so there is a regular presence in the community with individuals and groups for the duration of any project, and to really understand the challenges that are going on. But in order to create and understand those challenges and create the strong culture that's required, people have to really start to open up, as I referred to earlier. And personal presentations is a really good way of doing it. It's a simple exercise that when each participant literally prepares a personal presentation of him or herself, often around 3 things that made them who they are today, sharing stories that shaped them as an individual. And the purpose of this type of tool is to support each participant, each potential member of the core team, in getting to know each other as individuals, which builds the trust and openness. And you can often learn things about people you already know, be that colleagues or members of the community, that you didn't know before, and that's a very effective. The other thing that is vital to creating strong cultures when you're going out together to explore what issues there are in the culture is understanding each other's values, knowing what behaviours are acceptable within the team that are going to be working together. So this involves sharing with each other what's really important and coming to an agreement within the group who are going to work through the process as to how we will behave with each other, what's acceptable and what's not, and what matters to some people and what doesn't matter to the others. And these are two ways of creating the strong culture needed to go out and explore. And the exploration is really about using all sorts of different research methodology. And there are some specific human-centered research methodologies that you can use, or that we use, to really unearth the challenges and needs in the community. But it's vitally important that before you go out and do any of that work, that the culture, the values and the understanding exists within the group. So we move now to, imagine you've gone out and gathered all sorts of information. I wanted to bring in some examples here actually. So I can't share the detail of this project because it hasn't been released yet, but it's one of our most recent community engagement projects, and it's with the Lesbian, Gay and Bisexual Transgender Foundation in Manchester, the LGBT Foundation, and we've been working with them to develop their women's services, and that involves work with a lot of vulnerable women who both access the service and don't yet access the service, and have very different levels of experience of that safety within the LGBT community and also the wider community. And can be particularly challenging for them to do things like personal presentations and to even articulate what's important to them. But we did go through that process with various groups of users as well as staff and other stakeholders within the organisation. And this created a really healthy environment where everybody felt safe and supported and confident in bringing back information and sharing information about their own lives. And then we went into the next stage and downloaded learnings. So when everybody did come back and share, what's really important at this stage is that everybody downloads their learnings together. So it's not that one person takes all of the data to an office, to a computer, and types it all up. Again, this is a very inclusive experience where with post-it notes in a very creative session, notes, photos, quotes, everybody presents back their impressions and their findings and things that were really important that they've started to understand. And one by one, you'll go around the room over the course of a day or 2 days, or even longer if the data is massive, and capture ideas and stories on a huge sheets of paper. And this builds value in the group, that what everybody has collected is important. And we also did this at the LGBT Foundation. We spent a whole day in a large conference room with lots of users and again staff members and other funding agencies to see what was learned and to try and identify together the insights that we could gain from that. And once we had those insights, once we'd agreed what was really exciting, what was really interesting, what was really troubling about the challenges that existed for women engaging with the LGF services to support them to feel safer and engage in the community. Once we'd done that, we had to return again to the culture and have some rules around how we would ideate so that remained an inclusive process, an open process. And the apple drawing ideation is just an example of a brainstorming approach that is very inclusive and demonstrates the benefit of building on each other's ideas. So that's an exercise where you have a panel of 50 boxes and everybody has to draw an apple, but nobody can repeat the way the apple was drawn by somebody else. So that builds an understanding around creating ideas that ideas can build from each other, and no idea is ever the same. So this really is about getting as many ideas as possible before moving into and across creating a roadmap. So this is when it could be accused of getting a bit more serious and a bit more technical, and this is much more strategic. And this requires ideas that have been tested to some extent to really be rigorously analysed for their feasibility, viability and desirability. So feasibility is can we do this? Is this practical, both in terms of the skills we have and the technology available? The viability is it financially possible? Is this really possible? Can we get this from A to B, or will that not happen? And is this desirable? And by including everybody in these decisions, it becomes the community engage effectively because they see the constraints, they see the challenges, and everybody understands each other's point of view. And a roadmap really is just a name for a strategy or an action plan or a neighbourhood agreement. And it really sets out how we will get from where we are now to the desired solution. And it requires commitments from members of the community, from any parties and stakeholders involved as to what their part will be in getting to that desired solution and bringing it to life.
Well, thanks very much, Katie. Just like to pick up on a few points. Your last slide was a roadmap, and that roadmap showed a long and winding road. To quote John Lennon, it doesn't have to be a long and winding road, but I'd just like to pick up on a few points in your journey. We get really hung up on statistics. A community has, has been identified as teenage obesity is a major problem in this area. So what do the health people do, or whatever? They send people in to try and encourage people, to reduce weight or whatever. There's no engagement with the community to find out, how would you tackle it? How would you as a community take this forward? And it's often very difficult. We're hung up on statistics. If you listen to the government at the moment, there's a concern about reducing police on the streets. There's a concern about reducing the value of community safety partnerships. Why? Because we've got all the statistics which says reported crime is down. But I would challenge people, if they went into communities, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. And communities have got an opportunity to actually come together to change their neighbourhoods with support. Earlier on, Katie alluded to the fact about the youth consultation scheme that Greater Manchester Police Authority ran, which I was responsible for. And she talked about the public purse being spent by young people through a youth consultation panel within Bury, and that was replicated in other areas in Greater Manchester. But it needed support. Young people needed support. It was no good putting young people in front of the police and other professionals, asking questions, accepting an answer. What they needed to do was to debate the issue. And some of the issues were around nowhere to go. We know the old chestnuts. We've nowhere to go. We've nothing to do. We can't go in the park because it's poorly lit. We don't know who's in the park, etc. Other issues, quite funny. Young people said to, why do you throw us in the back of a police van? They're filthy. They're dirty. And the retort was, well, you shouldn't have been thrown in the police van in the first place. But hey-oh, everybody's not guilty, innocent and proved guilty. So there was a valid point, but young people were encouraged in that process to debate the issues. Katie also mentioned a youth facility, which Katie was quite involved in at the time, which was the Pyramid in the Park, which was basically a youth club, youth building in St Mary's Park in Prestwich. This was run by young people, staff were employed by young people, and this was one of the first social enterprises to come out of the engagement process, particularly for young people. We do, one of the successes of recent times in Cheshire and Warrington has been the enterprise coaching programme. But I would say that because I was sort of leading on that. But putting an enterprise coach in the centre of the heart of the community, to listen to the community. It wasn't just about increasing the business birth rate in higher IMD areas. It was about encouraging people to become more enterprising. And for somebody, getting off the settee in front of the telly to talk to somebody at the front gate is a vast improvement in being more enterprising. Yes, we did increase the business birth rate. We over 5 years we increased. We saw over 250 new businesses started, from dog walking, dog grooming, landscaping, etc. And we've carried that on into work with ex-offenders. Ex-offenders, when you engage with ex-offenders, I did some research in a number of prisons in Lancashire. One of the things was, well, we'll do a CV. Well, there's no quality control on CVs these days. We'll do a job application, but what am I going to get? I've got a record, but self-employment is a real opportunity for young people, for ex-offenders. So where are we? We basically, we know that we cannot impose things on communities. We need to get them to play a part. We need to listen. We need to encourage. We need to facilitate what the communities want, and we need to enable them to do it. Enterprise coaching is a way forward of doing that. But what we've also seen is a rise of community businesses. For instance, people in an area of Warrington were trained in participatory appraisal to become community researchers. This was basically part of a wider community organisation. That community organisation cannot, and a lot of organisations can't rely anymore on grant funding. There isn't the grant funding to go around. What they can do is to try and income generate. So because there was a need to engage communities, we trained a number of residents in PA, participatory appraisal, and appreciative inquiry, and other types of engagement. We were then able to gain commissions from other organisations, including a strategic health authority, a local enterprise partnership, and the local council, who wanted to develop opportunities for residents in other areas. That income generated opportunities and became a social enterprise arm of a community organisation. So if you work in communities and you listen, you encourage, you facilitate, and you enable, lots of things can happen. And it doesn't have to be throwing vast amounts of money at that opportunity.
It's true. We've got, thank you, Lisa, for the questions. We've got a question about one of the tools that I mentioned, which is all about the facilitating and engaging people. Right. And it's, please can you explain Apple ideation, as our group doesn't understand what you're trying to say. So the Apple ideation, that was an example of a method you might use to build empathy, collaboration and empowerment at that point in the process. So at the point where the solutions are being designed and ideas to the challenges that we're facing are created, this is a specific tool, and there's many tools that you can use to ideate with, but this is one that I chose to talk you through because of the nature of its ability to create empathy and collaboration and empowerment. And it's an ideation method, so it's a way of getting to people to open up to thinking of ideas. So it brings the team of people that you've got together to practice treating each other's ideas with respect and with empathy, to working together to build ideas together, and empowering people to really think differently. So because everybody has to draw, there has to be 50 apples drawn on a piece of paper, and no two apples can look the same, it encourages the understanding of the challenges around empathy, collaboration and empowerment. It encourages the group to think a bit more broadly and to work together to come up with new ways of approaching a particular challenge, and also introduces the idea that everybody has something to contribute that is new or different to others. So it's a way of establishing an approach to creating ideas. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
I'm sorry you couldn't see us, Lisa, but you know, we were looking at the presentation. The difficulty that a lot of areas face is that processes that are put in place don't actually encourage participation of communities. And as I said, it doesn't. You know, if you can go down the line of training people to be community researchers, you can get engage in various ways through public meetings, through you know, sort of using a PA model and going to things. But what I found was that the enterprise coaching opportunity, where you had an individual sited in a particular area, and they were you know, they sort of brought people together to listen to what they had to say, and they were a catalyst for change to develop a process which would lead ultimately, because you can't put an implementation strategy in place unless you've got the information and you've got people in communities on your side. So the enterprise coaching model is a really good way of developing that process.
That's great. Lisa says that they're trying the Apple idea. That's great. We'd love to let us know how it works.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Any further questions? I'm aware that it's quite difficult to listen and watch at the same time when you can't see me, but please, can you let us know your take on the PA system that you mentioned?
I remember years ago I was trained by Birmingham Settlement in PA techniques and the trainers model. PA is just one methodology of engaging local communities, but it's quite appealing because I remember the first time I tried it out in Salford. I worked with refugees and asylum seekers, and one of the we hired a local church. And the issues that we knew were around health, education, accommodation, and safety. So bringing together various interpreters, because there were a number of languages involved, and having some sort of having different areas where people could come to, and put one, where they lived, two, what their issues were, and specifically how those issues had affected them. And more importantly, what were their solutions? So the PA technique brings that out, but it's not necessarily an opportunity. People, you know, engage in silos. You know, what I found was that people would come into a community and say, "We want to know about your health problems," and somebody would come in, "We want to know about your antisocial programs, and we want to know about your housing problems." And so there's a vast number of organisations trying to solicit the views of communities without actually thinking what the community wants. So the PA technique does help solicit the information that you want.
It's certainly a technique that we try to use because that level of inclusion of members of the community in the research that you're doing is vitally important to really understanding the needs of people who might not be so accessible. So members of the community that have attended and are having conversations and entering into dialogue with you will have access to other groups of peers and other members of the community that it might be much harder to access. So participatory appraisal can really help in that respect. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, you talk, Lisa asked about the tools. I mean, the best way of engaging communities is to go into the community and listen to people. You know, when I was enterprise coaching in really deprived areas of a town not far from here, people, you know, nobody listens to me. You know, nobody, you know, will come in and we'll shape it up on some paper. We'll get, you know, the post-it note scenario comes in. But more importantly, you have to articulate those opportunities to people who allegedly hold the power. But the power triangle really should be inverted, because the people at the top of the triangle allegedly have the power, but the people, if you invert that triangle, the people at the bottom who live in the communities can have the power by articulating their concerns, solutions, you know, and bringing about change. It can happen. You know, too many communities are done to. You know, I said about the teenage obesity, or whatever it might be. There's a raft of people sent in, put a sticking plaster on it, and hope it works. And a lot of that's done because the funding to do it is around target setting. Forget the targets. Let's think about communities and how they function and what they want and what solutions have they got for making them their community better and safer.
And when you're training people in PA, what do you do in order to engage them in that process and then support them to?
Well, we start off by testing out the issues. What are the concerns? What really bugs you about you? Give us 2 or 3 examples about what is in your community. What's good about your community? What's bad about your community? Then we start to build up on that, and we start to tease out the concerns. You know, is it housing? You know, one of the areas I worked in, it was a pilot for the bedroom tax. You can imagine the number of people. You would have thought it would be coming out of the woodwork. But in actual fact, unless you actually went to them, people weren't particularly coming forward to talk about it. So what happens is that authorities put on, you know, we invite you to a session to talk about to listen about the bedroom tax and welfare benefits. Nobody comes. You know, and you cannot sit there and wait for people to come. You've got to get out into the community and find out what the issues are, what the concerns are, who is interested in moving those issues forward. Hope that helps, Lisa. Are there any more questions that people want to raise? Or have we gone on long enough? We will make available the presentation from Amity, and if there are any questions, please feel free to email us, and we'll endeavour to answer those questions. If we have no more questions, then basically I'd like to bring this webinar to an end. I'd like to thank Katie for the foresight and information about the processes that Amity adopt within the community. We are happy to answer questions, but in bringing it to an end, I'd like to remind people that there will be more NCSN webinars. Please check the NCSN website for information, and we thank you for your involvement.
Thank you.